The alarm bell rang through the training deck of Nexus Prime Station. Lieutenant Park Hannah floated in the middle of the zero-gravity chamber, her weapons spinning uselessly away from her hands. Around her, the other members of Strike Team 7 moved like dancers in the weightless environment. They twisted and turned with perfect control, plasma rifles firing precise shots at the floating targets. Hannah tried to grab her weapon, but only managed to spin herself in a slow circle. Her face burned with embarrassment as she watched Commander Lee Jun glide past her with effortless grace. His shots hit 3 targets in perfect sequence. Sergeant Kim Tae flipped backwards through the air, his boots finding purchase on the chamber wall, for he launched himself toward the next objective. "Time up," called the training computer in its cold, mechanical voice. The artificial gravity hummed back to life. Hannah dropped to the floor with a heavy thud, landing awkwardly on her knees. Her teammates landed with perfect balance, their boots touching down softly. The scoreboard appeared on the main screen, showing the results of their training exercise. Strike Team 7 had scored the lowest points in 3 months. Commander Lee turned to face his team. His dark eyes found Hannah immediately. She could see the frustration written across his face, though he tried to hide it. Lee was a good leader, but even good leaders had limits. "What happened out there, Park?" Lee asked. His voice was calm, but Hannah heard the edge underneath. "I lost control of my weapon, sir," Hannah said. She kept her eyes focused on her boots. "The rotation threw me off balance." Sergeant Kim Tae laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Threw you off balance? We've been doing zero-G training for 6 months now. How are you still getting thrown off balance?" Corporal Cho Min stepped forward. She was usually the quiet one on the team, but now she spoke up. "Kim, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," Kim shot back. "We're supposed to be the best. We're Strike Team 7. We should be setting records, not breaking them in the wrong direction." Hannah felt her cheeks growing hot. She wanted to defend herself, but what could she say? Kim was right. She was the weak link in their chain. Every simulation proved it. Every training exercise showed it. Every mission briefing reminded everyone of it. The training deck doors opened with a soft hiss. 3 figures entered the chamber. They were tall and covered in thick dark fur. Their yellow eyes gleamed as they looked at the human team. Hannah recognized them immediately. They were Vorthok warriors, members of the alien species that had joined the Galactic Defense Corps 5 years ago. The leader of the Vorthok group stepped forward. His name was Gorthok, and he was known throughout the station as one of the finest warriors in the Corps. He looked at the scoreboard and made a sound that might have been laughter. "The famous Strike Team 7, Gorthok said. His voice was deep and rough. "We heard you were having difficulties. We wanted to see for ourselves." Commander Lee straightened his shoulders. "We're working through some training issues." "Training issues," repeated another Vorthok warrior. "Is that what humans call it when they cannot perform basic military functions?" The third Vorthok looked directly at Hannah. "We have heard stories about this one. They say she only made it into the Corps because her father knows someone important. Is this true, small human?" Hannah felt her face burning now. The rumor had followed her since her first day at the academy. It wasn't true, but truth didn't seem to matter. Her father was a cargo ship captain, not a military officer. He had no connections, no influence. She had earned her place through test scores and determination. But no one wanted to believe that. "My team member earned her position," Lee said firmly. Gorthok made that laughing sound again. "Perhaps. But can she keep it? The Corps has no use for weakness. The galaxy is a dangerous place. When the real fighting comes, there will be no room for those who cannot perform." The Vorthok warriors turned and left the training chamber. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Hannah watched them go, feeling smaller with each step they took. Kim Tae shook his head. "Great. Now the whole station is talking about us. About how we can't even handle a simple zero-G exercise." Commander Lee warned. "No, sir. I respect you, and I respect this team. But something has to change. We can't keep carrying dead weight, not when lives are at stake." Hannah looked up at Kim. His face was serious, not angry. Somehow that made it worse. If he had been shouting, she could have gotten angry back. But Kim was just stating facts, and facts were harder to fight than emotions. Maybe you're right, Hannah said quietly. The training chamber fell silent. Even Kim looked surprised by her words. Maybe I don't belong here, Hannah continued. Maybe everyone is right. Maybe I am just a wannabe playing soldier. Commander Lee took a step toward her. Park don't know, sir. It's okay. I've been thinking about it for weeks. Maybe months. I see how you all move out there. I see how natural it is for you. Fighting, flying, shooting. It's like you were born for this. But me. I have to think about every step. Every movement? By the time I decide what to do, the moment is already gone. Corporal Cho Min moved closer. Hannah, everyone learns at their own pace. Some people never learn at all, Kim said. His voice was softer now, but the words still cut deep. Hannah nodded. Exactly. Some people never learn. Maybe I'm one of those people. Maybe I should accept that and move on. She turned toward the exit, but Commander Lee's voice stopped her. Where are you going? To my quarters, sir. To think. We have another training session in 2 hours. Hannah paused at the doorway. I'll be there, sir. But after that, I think I need to make some decisions about my future. She left the chamber without looking back. Behind her, she heard Kim start to say something, but Lee cut him off. Their voices faded as the doors closed. Hannah walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, passing other Corps members. Some nodded at her politely. Others ignored her completely. A few whispered to each other as she passed. She wondered if they were talking about the training scores, about Strike Team 7's failure, about the wannabe who couldn't cut it. Her quarters were small but comfortable. A bed, a desk, a small window that looked out at the stars. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, real threats waited. Real enemies that would require real soldiers to stop them? Maybe Kim was right. Maybe the galaxy was too dangerous for people like her. Maybe it was time to stop pretending she belonged here. 3 days later, the emergency alarm woke everyone on Nexus Prime Station. The sound was different from the training alarms. This was the real thing. Deep, urgent tones that meant danger was coming. Lieutenant Park Hannah rolled out of her bed and grabbed her uniform. Around the station, thousands of other Corps members were doing the same thing. She could hear boots running in the corridors outside her quarters. Voices shouted orders and questions. She reached the main briefing hall just as Admiral Song Kyun took the stage. The Admiral was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had been fighting wars since before Hannah was born. When Admiral Song spoke, everyone listened. Attention all personnel, the Admiral said. Her voice carried clearly through the hall's speakers. At 0347 hours this morning, our deep space sensors detected an unknown energy signature approaching from the outer rim, the main screen. Behind her, lit up with star charts and data readings. Hannah found herself pushed toward the back of the crowd. But she could still see the display clearly. The object is massive, Admiral Song continued. Preliminary scans suggest it is approximately 2,000 kilometers in diameter. It is moving at speeds that should be impossible for something of that size. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 2,000 kilometers was the size of a small moon. Nothing that big should be able to move faster than the speed of light. But the readings on the screen showed otherwise, Commander. Lee stood near the front of the crowd with the rest of Strike Team 7. Hannah could see Kim Tae and Cho Min beside him. They looked as confused as everyone else. The most disturbing aspect of this contact, Admiral Song said. Admiral Song said the object appears to be alive. The murmurs became louder. Several officers began talking among themselves. The Admiral raised her hand for silence. I repeat, our sensors indicate that this object is a living organism. The energy patterns are biological in nature, but unlike anything in our databases, the entity is currently 3 light-years away from our position. But it is heading directly toward Earth's solar system. The hall erupted in voices. Officers shouted questions. Scientists demanded to see the raw data. Military leaders called for immediate defensive preparations. Admiral Song waited for the noise to die down. All senior staff will report to Conference Room Alpha in 10 minutes. All strike teams are to remain on standby. We will have more information as it becomes available. The crowd began to break up. Hannah started to follow the other members of Strike Team 7, but stopped when she saw the data display more clearly. Something about the energy readings looked familiar. The patterns reminded her of something she had seen before, but she couldn't remember where. She pulled out her personal tablet and took a quick picture of the screen before security could stop her. The image was blurry. She could make out the basic wave patterns and energy signatures. Back in her quarters, Hannah spread her old study materials across her desk. Most Corps members focus purely on military training, but Hannah had always been interested in other subjects. She had studied archaeology, ancient languages, and old human cultures before joining the military. Her professors had called it a waste of time. Soldiers don't need to know about dead civilizations, they said. But Hannah found the old stories fascinating. Humans had been telling tales about monsters and heroes for thousands of years. She wondered if any of those stories were based on real events. She opened her collection of ancient texts and began comparing the energy patterns from her tablet to the descriptions in old books. Most of the stories were clearly fiction, but some contained surprisingly detailed descriptions of cosmic entities. After 2 hours of searching, she found what she was looking for. The text was from an ancient civilization that had lived on Earth over 5,000 years ago. They called themselves the First Watchers, and their writings described creatures that came from the spaces between stars. The First Watchers wrote about entities that consumed entire worlds, feeding on both matter and life force. They called these creatures the Dark Hunters. According to the text, the Dark Hunters were enormous beings that traveled through dimensions, searching for populated worlds to devour. They fed not just on physical matter, but on the consciousness and souls of living beings. The First Watchers described them as creatures of pure hunger that could never be satisfied. The energy patterns in the ancient descriptions matched the readings from the space sensors almost perfectly. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. If the First Watchers were right, the thing heading toward Earth wasn't just big and alive. It was something far worse. It was a predator that had been hunting civilizations for millions of years. She grabbed her tablet and ran toward the briefing rooms. She had to tell someone about this. The information might be important for planning a defense. Conference Room Alpha was heavily guarded. 2 security officers stood outside the door, and Hannah could hear voices inside. She recognized Admiral Song's voice, along with several other senior officers. "Excuse me," Hannah said to one of the guards. "I have information that might be relevant to the briefing." The guard looked at her rank insignia and shook his head. "Sorry, Lieutenant. Senior staff only. You'll get briefed through your chain of command." "But I found something important. Information about what this thing might be. Take it up with your commanding officer." Hannah hurried through the corridors looking for Commander Lee. She found him in the strike team ready room with Kim Tae and Cho Min. They were studying tactical displays and discussing possible combat scenarios. "Commander," Hannah said, rushing into the room, "I found something about the entity that's approaching." Lee looked up from his display. "What kind of something?" Hannah pulled out her tablet and showed them the ancient text. "I think this thing has attacked before, thousands of years ago. There are records of similar entities in old human writings." Kim Tae glanced at the tablet and snorted. "Ancient stories. Really, Hannah? We're dealing with a real space creature, not fairy tales." "It's not a fairy tale," Hannah insisted. "Look at the energy patterns. They match exactly with what the sensors detected." Commander Lee took the tablet and studied it more carefully. "These writings are very old. How can we be sure they're accurate?" "The descriptions are too detailed to be fiction," Hannah said. "They knew about energy wavelengths and dimensional travel thousands of years before humans developed spaceflight. Someone saw these creatures before." Chomin leaned over to look at the tablet. "What do the writings say about fighting them?" Hannah's face fell. "That's the problem. According to the First Watchers, No civilization has ever successfully fought one of these creatures. They call them unstoppable. They consume entire worlds and then move on to the next target. Well, that's encouraging, Kim Tae said sarcastically. Commander Lee handed the tablet back to Hannah. I appreciate your research, Lieutenant. But the senior staff has access to the best scientists and analysts in the corps. If there was historical precedent for this entity, they would have found it. But what if they don't know where to look? Hannah asked. Most people don't study ancient human cultures. They focus on recent history and current technology. That's because recent history and current technology are what matter in military situations, Lee replied gently. Ancient stories might be interesting, but they won't help us plan a real defense against a real threat. Hannah felt her shoulders slump. Once again, her different interests were being dismissed as irrelevant. Her teammates were probably right. What could ancient stories teach them about fighting a space creature? But as she looked at the energy patterns on her tablet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The First Watchers hadn't just described the creatures. They had also written about something else. Something about humans who were different. Humans who could resist the creature's influence. The texts were incomplete. But they mentioned people who could walk in the dark spaces without being consumed. People who could think clearly when others fell into terror and madness. Hannah wondered if the First Watchers had been describing people like her. People who didn't fit in with normal military thinking. People who saw patterns that others missed. She looked at her teammates who had already returned to their tactical planning. They were good soldiers, but they thought like soldiers. They approached problems with standard military solutions. Maybe that wouldn't be enough this time. Maybe the galaxy needed us. Someone who thought differently. The entity emerged from hyperspace near Jupiter like a nightmare made real. Lieutenant Park Hannah was in the observation deck when it happened. She had been studying her ancient texts again, trying to find more information about the Dark Hunters. The deck was mostly empty except for a few off-duty personnel who liked to watch the stars. Then space itself seemed to tear open. A massive rift appeared in the darkness, glowing with sickly green light. Something enormous pushed through the opening. At first, Hannah thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Nothing could be that big, nothing living anyway. But as the creature fully emerged, she realized the sensor readings had been accurate. The thing was the size of a small moon, but it moved like a living animal. Its surface was black and organic-looking, covered in what appeared to be scales or armor plating. Along its sides, she could see structures that might have been wings or fins, or something else entirely. The emergency alarms began screaming throughout Nexus's prime station. All personnel to battle stations, came Admiral Song's voice over the communication system. This is not a drill. All strike teams report to ready positions immediately. Hannah ran from the observation deck toward her team's assembly point. The corridors were filled with running soldiers and panicked civilians. She had never seen the station in such chaos. She found Strike Team 7 in their ready room, suiting up for combat. Commander Lee was already in his armor, checking his weapons. Kim Tae and Cho Min were doing the same. Hannah Lee called when he saw her. Get your gear. We're launching in 5 minutes. What's the mission? She asked, pulling on her combat suit. Reconnaissance, Kim Tae answered. Command wants us to get close enough to scan the thing and report back. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Get close to that monster. She had seen what it looked like from the observation deck. The idea of flying anywhere near it terrified her. They ran to the launch bay, where their fighter craft waited. Round them, dozens of other teams were doing the same thing. The bay was filled with the sound of engines starting up and pilots calling out pre-flight checks. As they climbed into their ships, Hannah noticed something strange. Several of the other pilots looked confused and disoriented. Some were stumbling as they walked. Others seemed to be having trouble with simple tasks like fastening their harnesses. Strike Team 7. You are cleared for launch, came the voice from flight control. Commander Lee's fighter shot out of the launch bay first, followed by Kim Tae and Cho Min. Hannah brought up the rear, struggling as always to keep up with her more experienced teammates. They flew in formation toward Jupiter, where the creature had begun its work. Through her cockpit window, Hannah could see what it was doing to the giant planet's moons. The entity had attached itself to Io, one of Jupiter's largest moons, and was consuming it. Not just eating it, she realized. Absorbing it. The moon's substance seemed to flow into the creature like water being sucked through a straw. Where Io had been solid rock and ice, now there was only empty space. My God, she heard Cho Min whisper over the radio. It's actually eating the moon. Stay focused, Commander Lee ordered. Remember, we're here to observe and report. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. As they got closer, Hannah began to feel something strange. It started as a mild headache, but quickly grew worse. The pain seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her skull, like someone was pressing on her brain. Does anyone else feel that? Kimtae asked over the radio. His voice sounded strained. Feel what? Lee responded. But even as he spoke, Hannah could hear the tension in his voice. The feeling grew stronger. It wasn't just pain now, it was fear. Pure, overwhelming terror that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Hannah found herself thinking about death, about the end of everything, about cosmic emptiness that would swallow all life. I can't. Cho Min's voice came over the radio, weak and shaking. I can't think straight. Something's wrong. Hannah looked at her scanner display and saw that Cho Min's fighter was drifting off course. The other woman wasn't responding to her controls properly. Min, get back in formation, Lee ordered. But his own voice was becoming unclear. Through her cockpit, Hannah could see Commander Lee's fighter wavering in its flight path. Kim Tae's ship was doing the same thing. Both pilots seemed to be having trouble with basic flying. The fear was getting worse. Hannah felt it pressing against her mind like a physical weight. Images flashed through her thoughts. Visions of death, of civilizations being consumed, of endless darkness spreading across the galaxy. But something was different about how she was experiencing it. The fear was there, but it felt distant, like she was watching it happen to someone else instead of feeling it herself. She realized that while her teammates were being overwhelmed by whatever the creature was doing to their minds, she was somehow protected from the worst of it. Team. Report status, she called over the radio. No response. She looked at her tactical display and saw that all three of her teammates' fighters were now drifting without purpose. Their life signs were still strong, but their brain activity readings were extremely low. Lee, can you hear me? She called. Still nothing. Hannah was alone. She turned her fighter back toward Nexus Prime Station and activated her emergency beacon. As she flew, she tried to contact the station's flight control center. Nexus Prime, this is Strike Team 7. I have 3 team members down and need immediate assistance. The radio crackled, but no clear response came through. She tried again, but heard only static and fragments of panicked voices. When she reached the station, she found chaos. Ships were floating dead in space around the docking bays. Some had crashed into the station's outer hull. Others were spinning slowly, their pilots apparently unconscious. She managed to dock her fighter manually and ran through the station's corridors. What she found made her blood run cold. People were everywhere, but none of them were moving. They sat or lay in the corridors, their eyes open but seeing nothing. They were breathing, but when Hannah waved her hand in front of their faces, they didn't react. She found Admiral Song in the command center, slumped over her command console. The Admiral's eyes were open, but she stared at nothing. Her face wore an expression of absolute terror. Everyone on the station had been affected by whatever the creature was doing. Everyone except Hannah. She ran to the communication station and tried to contact Earth, but the equipment wasn't responding properly. Most of the automated systems were still working, but anything that required human operation had stopped. Through the command center's main screen, she could see the creature in the distance. It had finished consuming Io and was now moving toward Europa, Jupiter's ice moon. The process would probably take it only a few hours. After Europa, there were other moons. And after the moons, there were the inner planets. Earth was still days away, but the creature was moving steadily toward it. Hannah sat in the empty command center, surrounded by the unconscious forms of her fellow soldiers. She was the only person on the station who could still think clearly. It's the only one who could move freely. she was also the only one who might be able to do something about the approaching disaster. But what could one person do against something that could eat planets? What could a wannabe soldier accomplish that entire fleets of experienced fighters could not? She thought about the ancient texts she had been studying. The first Watchers had written about people who could resist the creature's mental influence. People who could walk in dark places without losing their minds. Maybe she was one of those people. Maybe her different way of thinking, the same trait that made her a poor soldier, was exactly what the galaxy needed now. She looked around the silent command center and made a decision. If she was the only one left who could act, then she would have to find a way to act, even if she had no idea how. For the first time in her life, Lieutenant Park Hannah was completely alone with her thoughts. The silence on Nexus Prime Station was almost complete. Only the soft humming of life support systems and the distant vibration of the main engines broke the quiet. She walked through the corridors, checking on the unconscious crew members. Their bodies were alive and healthy, but their minds seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Some had peaceful expressions on their faces, as if they were having pleasant dreams. Others looked terrified, trapped in nightmares they could not escape. Hannah tried shaking several people gently, but none of them responded. She checked their medical readings on the wall displays. Heart rates, breathing, and brain activity were all present. But the brain patterns were unlike anything she had seen before. It looked like their consciousness had been pulled away from their bodies. Leaving only the basic functions needed to keep them alive, she made her way to the station's medical bay, hoping to find some kind of answer. The chief medical officer, Dr. Kong Hai, was slumped over her desk. Like everyone else, she was breathing but unaware of the world around her. Hannah accessed the medical computer and ran a full body scan on herself. She wanted to understand why she was different, why she could resist whatever the creature was doing to everyone else. The results surprised her. Her brain showed activity in areas that were normally quiet. Regions that most people never used were lighting up like Christmas trees. Her neural pathways were running in patterns that the computer labeled as highly unusual and outside normal parameters. She compared her brain scan to the ones the computer had taken of other crew members over the past few months. The difference was remarkable. Her mind literally worked differently than other people's minds. The patterns reminded her of something she had read about in her archaeology studies. Ancient texts sometimes described people who could see things others could not. Shamans, prophets, and mystics who claimed they could communicate with spirits and travel to other worlds. Scientists had always assumed these were just stories or mental illnesses. But what if they were real? What if some humans had always been born with brains that could operate on different levels of reality? Hannah pulled out her collection of ancient texts and began reading more carefully. The first Watchers had written extensively about people they called the Touched. These were individuals who could resist the mental attacks of the Dark Hunters and sometimes even communicate with them, according to the texts. The Touched were often seen as strange or broken by their communities. They had trouble with normal social activities and often seemed distracted or confused. But when cosmic threats appeared, they became incredibly valuable. The description fit her perfectly. She had always been the odd one out. Bad at military drills, slow to understand combat tactics, unable to think like a proper soldier. Her mind wandered during briefings. She got lost in ancient books while others practiced shooting. She asked questions that seemed unrelated to the mission at hand. Everyone thought she was just not cut out for military life. But maybe she had been cut out for something else. Entirely, she returned to the command center and tried to establish communication with Earth. Most of the long-range communication equipment required multiple operators, but she found an emergency beacon that she could operate alone. The message she sent was simple. Nexus Prime Station compromised. All personnel incapacitated by a known psychic attack. One survivor requesting immediate assistance. While she waited for a response, she studied the creature through the station's long-range sensors. It had finished consuming Europa and was now working on Ganymede, Jupiter's largest moon. The process was becoming faster. The creature seemed to be learning how to feed more efficiently. She noticed something else in the sensor data. The creature wasn't just consuming matter, it was also absorbing something else. Energy patterns that looked like neural activity, like consciousness itself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The creature wasn't just eating planets and moons. It was eating the minds of every living thing on those worlds. All the people who had been rendered unconscious weren't just having their minds suppressed. Their consciousness was being slowly drained away, pulled into the creature to feed its endless hunger. If she didn't find a way to stop it, everyone on the station would eventually die. Not their bodies, but their souls. Their essential selves would be consumed, leaving behind empty shells. And after it finished with the station, it would move on to Earth. Billions of human minds would be absorbed into the creature's vast consciousness. Lost forever in its alien hunger, she had to act. But what could one person do? She wasn't a warrior like Commander Lee or Kim Tae. She wasn't a brilliant scientist like Dr. Kong. She was just someone who read old books and asked weird questions, but maybe that was enough. She returned to her texts and began reading with new urgency. The first Watchers had described methods that the Touched could use to fight the Dark Hunters. The writings were incomplete and often unclear, but she could make out some basic concepts. The key was understanding that the creatures weren't purely evil. They were ancient beings that had become corrupted by their own hunger. Long ago, they had been something else. Something that didn't need to consume other consciousness to survive. The text suggested that someone, with the right kind of mind, could reach the original consciousness buried deep inside the creature. They could communicate with what the monster had been before it became a destroyer of worlds. It sounded impossible. How could anyone reach into the mind of something so massive and alien? How could a human consciousness connect with something that had existed for millions of years? But as Hannah studied the technical specifications of the station's equipment, she began to see possibilities. Nexus Prime had experimental technology that could amplify and project neural patterns across space. The equipment had been designed for long-range communication with deep space exploration teams. But it might be adaptable for other purposes. She spent hours studying the technical manuals, learning how the consciousness projection systems worked. The technology was dangerous and untested for the kind of use she was considering. There was a good chance it would kill her, but if she did nothing, the creature would eventually consume every living mind in the solar system. Her death alone would be meaningless if everyone else died anyway. She made her decision working through the night. She began modifying the station's consciousness projection equipment. She had to teach herself advanced engineering as she worked. Learning from technical manuals and computer tutorials, the process was slow and difficult. She made mistakes that could have destroyed the entire station. But gradually, she began to understand how the systems worked and how they could be modified for her purposes. As she worked, she felt something changing inside her mind. The strange neural patterns that made her different were becoming stronger. She could sense the creature's presence more clearly now, like a vast shadow pressing against her thoughts. But she could also sense something else. Deep inside that shadow, buried under layers of hunger and alien malice, there was something that felt almost familiar, something that might once have been gentle and curious. Like the explorers and scientists she had known in her life, the creature had not always been a monster. And if it had not always been a monster, then maybe it could be something else again. The question was whether she could survive long enough to find out. 2 days had passed since the creature began its feast on Jupiter's moons. Lieutenant Parkana had barely slept during that time. She worked frantically in the station's engineering sections, trying to build something that had never been built before. The consciousness projection system was coming together slowly. She had stripped parts from medical scanners, communication arrays, and even the station's main computer. The result looked like a mechanical nightmare, with cables and circuit boards connected in ways that would horrify any proper engineer. But it might actually work. Engineer Nam. Soha found her there on the morning of the 3rd day. Hannah looked up from her work to see the older woman standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and looking confused. "What happened?" Soha asked. "I remember being at my duty station, and then ... nothing. How long was I unconscious? Hannah felt a surge of relief. Someone else was awake. Someone with actual technical knowledge who might be able to help. 2.5 days, Hannah answered. The creature did something to everyone's minds. Some kind of psychic attack that knocked out the entire station. Soha looked around the engineering bay and saw the chaos of Hannah's modifications. What are you building? Hannah explained her plan as quickly as she could. The creature wasn't just a mindless eating machine. It was an ancient being that had become corrupted by its own hunger. If she could project her consciousness into its mind, she might be able to communicate with whatever remained of its original self. Suha stared at her in disbelief. You want to put your mind inside that thing? Hannah, that's completely insane. Even if the equipment worked, the psychic shock would probably kill you instantly. Maybe Hannah agreed. But if I don't try, it's going to consume Earth in about 4 days. Everyone on the planet will end up like the crew here, only worse. Their consciousness will be absorbed permanently. Before Soha could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Pilot Yunde appeared in the doorway, looking as confused as Soha had been. Someone want to tell me why I woke up on the floor of the mess hall? Day asked. Hannah quickly explained the situation again. Day listened with growing horror as she described the creature's advance toward Earth, so we're the only ones awake on the entire station. Day asked. As far as I can tell, Hannah replied, and I don't know why you two recovered when nobody else did. Maybe the creature's influence is weakening as it moves further away. Or maybe some people have partial resistance. Soha was studying Hannah's makeshift equipment. This is brilliant work, but it's also incredibly dangerous. The power requirements alone could overload the station's generators. I've run the calculations, Hannah said. We have enough power for 1 attempt. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. 1 attempt to do what exactly? Day asked. Let's say you manage to project your consciousness into this thing's mind. Then what? How do you stop a planet-eating monster by talking to it? Hannah pulled out her ancient texts and showed them the passages she had been studying. According to these writings, the creatures weren't always destroyers. They were once explorers, traveling between dimensions to learn about different forms of life. But something went wrong. They became addicted to consuming consciousness, and that addiction drove them mad. So you think you can cure its addiction? Soha asked skeptically. I think I can remind it of what it used to be, Hannah said. Show it that there are other ways to connect with life besides consuming it. The text suggests that the creatures are driven by loneliness as much as hunger. They devour other minds because it's the only way they know how to feel connected to other beings. Day shook her head. This sounds like something from a fairy tale. Ancient texts, psychic connections, creatures that can be redeemed through the power of understanding. Things like that don't happen in real life. Maybe they do, Hannah said quietly. Maybe we just don't recognize them when they happen. She showed them the brain scan she had taken of herself. Look at these neural patterns. My mind works differently than yours. I can resist the creature's psychic attacks because my brain operates on frequencies that it can't easily manipulate. But that also means you might be able to communicate with it on those same frequencies. Soha realized, exactly. The texts describe people like me. They call them the touched. People who can walk between different levels of reality without losing themselves. Day looked at the technical specifications Hannah had written out. Even if this works, how do you plan to get close enough to the creature? It's still near Jupiter. It's surrounded by an energy field that would destroy any normal spacecraft. Hannah been thinking about that problem for hours. We modify one of the fighters. Strip out everything except life support and the consciousness projector. Make it as small and fast as possible. The creature might not notice a single fighter if it's focused on feeding. That's suicide, Soha said flatly. Maybe. But staying here is definitely suicide. Look at the sensor readings. The creature has consumed 3 of Jupiter's moons already. It's getting stronger and faster with each feeding. By the time it reaches Earth, it will be powerful enough to drain the entire planet's population in a matter of hours. They spent the rest of the day working together on the modifications. Soa's engineering expertise was invaluable in making sure the consciousness projector would actually function. Day helped design the fighter modifications that would give Hannah the best chance of reaching the creature alive. As they worked, more crew members began to wake up. Commander Lee was among them, along with Kim Tae and Cho Min. But most people remained unconscious, trapped in whatever dream state the creature had imposed on them. When Lee learned about Hannah's plan, his reaction was predictable. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "I won't authorize a suicide mission based on ancient superstitions and untested technology." "With respect," Sir Hannah replied, "you don't have the authority to stop me. Everyone else on this station is unconscious or barely functional. I'm the only one who can operate the consciousness projector, and I'm the only one with immunity to the creature's psychic attacks." Kim Tae, who had been unusually quiet since waking up, finally spoke. "She's right, Commander. We don't have any other options. Our weapons can't hurt that thing. Our ships can't get close to it. If Hannah thinks she can communicate with it, we have to let her try." Lee looked around the room at the faces of his team. For the first time since Hannah had known him, the confident commander looked uncertain. "What if you're wrong?" he asked. "What if this creature can't be reasoned with? What if it just consumes your consciousness like all the others?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "Then at least we'll know for sure. And maybe the information I gather before it kills me will help someone else find a different solution." Cho Min stepped forward. "I want to help with the modifications. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." Over the next several hours, a small group worked to complete the fighter modifications. The consciousness projector was installed in place of the weapon systems. Additional power cells were added to support the equipment. The life support systems were streamlined to provide maximum endurance with minimum weight. As they worked, Hannah felt something she had never experienced before. Her teammates were no longer treating her like the weak link in their chain. They were looking to her for leadership, trusting her judgment, respecting her expertise. It should have felt good, but instead it terrified her. The weight of everyone's hopes pressed down on her like a physical burden. If she failed, Earth would fall. Billions of people would die, their consciousness consumed by an alien hunger that could never be satisfied. But as she looked at her modified fighter craft, she felt something else as well. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. This was what she had been born to do, even if she hadn't understood it before. The strange neural patterns in her brain, the fascination with ancient texts, the inability to fit into normal military thinking, it had all been preparing her for this moment. "The modifications are complete," Soha announced. "But I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely sure about this?" Hannah looked through the hangar window at the distant glow where the creature continued its feast. Jupiter looked smaller now, diminished by the loss of its moons. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "This is what I meant to do." Whether she would survive it was another question entirely. Lieutenant Park Hannah sealed her helmet and ran through the final system checks on her modified fighter. The consciousness projector hummed quietly behind her seat, its experimental circuits glowing with soft blue light. Outside the cockpit window, she could see the massive shape of the creature in the distance. It had finished consuming. Ganymede and was now moving toward the inner solar system. Earth had less than 2 days before the monster reached it. "All systems are green." Engineer Namsoa's voice came through the radio. "Power levels are stable. The projector is ready for activation. Communications are clear," added pilot Yoon-dae. "We'll maintain contact as long as possible." Commander Lee's voice joined the conversation. "Hannah, I want you to know that whatever happens out there, you've already proved yourself 10 times over. You're not a wannabe anymore. You're the bravest soldier I've ever served with." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." She launched her fighter from Nexus Prime's hangar bay and began the long flight toward the creature. As she flew, she tried to prepare her mind for what was coming. The consciousness projector would separate her awareness from her body and send it directly into the monster's psyche. If the ancient texts were right, she would find herself in a realm of pure thought and memory. If the texts were wrong, she would simply die. The flight took 3 hours. As she got closer to the creature, she began to feel the familiar pressure against her mind. But this time, instead of resisting it, she tried to understand it. The psychic waves weren't just attacks. They were communications. The creature was trying to speak to every consciousness it encountered, but its voice was so overwhelming that most minds shut down completely. Her mind was different enough to hear the voice without being destroyed by it. When she reached the edge of the creature's energy field, she activated the consciousness projector. The world around her flickered and changed. Her fighter's cockpit faded away, replaced by something that defied description. She found herself standing in a vast space that seemed to be made of memory itself. Around her, she could see fragments of countless civilizations. Cities from 1,000 worlds flickered in and out of existence. She heard voices speaking in languages that had been dead for millions of years. This was the creature's mind, and it contained the consciousness of every being it had ever consumed. She began to walk deeper into the mental landscape. With each step, the visions became more intense. She saw the rise and fall of entire species. She witnessed the birth of stars and the death of planets. She felt the joy and sorrow of billions of beings who had lived and died across the galaxy, and through it all, she sensed a vast presence watching her. The creature's consciousness was enormous beyond comprehension. It stretched across dimensions, touching realities that humans had never imagined. But as Hannah walked deeper into its mind, she began to sense something familiar within the alien thoughts: loneliness. The creature was achingly, desperately alone. It had consumed so many civilizations that it no longer remembered what it was like to simply communicate with another being. The only way it knew how to connect with other minds was to absorb them completely. She found the center of the creature's consciousness in a place that looked like a vast library. Shelves stretched impossibly high, filled with the memories and experiences of every world the creature had devoured. At the center of the library sat a figure that might once have been beautiful. It was the creature's original self, buried under eons of corruption and hunger. The figure looked up as Hannah approached. Its eyes were ancient beyond measure, filled with a sadness that seemed to encompass the entire universe. "Another voice," the figure said. Its words echoed strangely in the mental space. "Another consciousness to add to the collection. But you are different. You walk freely in the dark spaces." "How is this possible?" "Because I'm different too," Hannah replied. "My mind works in ways that others don't understand." "Just like yours once did." The figure studied her with interest. "You speak as if you know what I was before the hunger took hold." Hannah gestured to the library around them. "I can see what you were. You were an explorer, a scholar. You traveled between realities to learn and understand. You collected knowledge, not consciousness." "Yes," the figure said softly. "I remember now. I was a seeker of truth. I wanted to understand the nature of existence across all dimensions. But the hunger changed everything." "When did it start?" Hannah asked. The figure's expression grew pained. "I found a dying civilization. Their sun was collapsing, and they were facing extinction. They begged me to preserve their culture, their memories. So I absorbed their consciousness into my own mind, thinking I could keep them alive within me. But it didn't work the way you expected, no. The absorption process was addictive. Each time I consumed a consciousness, I felt less alone, but the feeling never lasted. I needed more and more to fill the emptiness inside me. Eventually, I began seeking out civilizations specifically to consume them." Hannah felt a wave of compassion for the ancient being. "You became addicted to connection, but the only connection you knew how to make was through consumption." "And now I cannot stop," the figure said. "The hunger controls me. I have become a slave to my own need for companionship." "What if I told you there was another way?" Hannah asked. "A way to connect with other minds without consuming them?" The figure looked at her with desperate hope. "Is such a thing possible?" "It's what every sentient being does naturally. We communicate. We share experiences through words and emotions and art. We connect with each other while remaining separate individuals. But I have forgotten how," the figure said. "The hunger has consumed even my memories of what I once was." Hannah stepped closer. "Then let me remind you. She reached out with her consciousness and gently touched the figure's mind. Instead of trying to absorb or be absorbed, she simply shared. She showed the creature her own memories of friendship, of working with her team, of the simple pleasure of conversation. The figure gasped as it experienced these new sensations. "I had forgotten," it whispered. "I had forgotten what it was like to simply talk with another being." "You can remember," Hannah said. "You can choose to be what you were before the hunger took control. But what about all the consciousness I have already consumed? What about the billions of beings trapped within my mind?" Hannah looked around at the vast library of stolen memories. "You can set them free. Return them to life. Use your power to restore what you have taken instead of continuing to take more." The figure stood up from its seat among the memories. As it did, Hannah could see it changing. The corruption and hunger that had twisted its form began to fade away, revealing something beautiful and wise underneath. "Yes," the creature said. "Yes, I remember now. I remember what I was meant to be." But as the transformation began, Hannah felt something else. The process of restoring all the consumed consciousness would require enormous energy. Energy that would have to come from somewhere. "There is a cost," the creature said, reading her thoughts. "To free all the minds I have consumed, to restore the civilizations I have destroyed, I will need to give up much of my own consciousness. I will become smaller, weaker." "Will you die?" Hannah asked. "Not die. But I will no longer be the vast entity I have become. I will be much closer to what I was originally. A single being among many instead of a godlike consumer of worlds." The creature paused, looking directly at her. "And there is something else. The process will work better if I have a guide. Someone to help me remember what true connection feels like. Someone whose consciousness can merge with mine temporarily to show me the way back to what I was." Hannah understood. The creature was asking her to sacrifice herself to help it complete the transformation. "If I do this," she said, "will my consciousness survive?" "In a way," the creature replied. "You will become part of me as I become part of you. We will be separate but connected, two minds sharing the same space, helping each other remember what it means to truly live." Hannah thought about Earth, about the billions of people who would die if she failed. She thought about her teammates, about all the crew members still unconscious on Nexus Prime, she thought. About every civilization the creature could restore. If she helped it remember how, the choice was clear. "I'll do it," she said. The creature smiled, and for the first time, its expression was filled with hope instead of hunger. "Then let us walk together into the light." The transformation began with light. Lieutenant Park Hannah felt her consciousness merge with the ancient creature's mind. And suddenly she could see everything it had seen across millions of years. She experienced the joy of its first explorations, the wonder of discovering new forms of life, and the terrible moment when hunger had replaced curiosity, but she also felt something else. Hope. Together, they began the work of restoration. The creature's vast power, guided by Hannah's compassion and understanding, reached out across space and time. Every world that had been consumed, every civilization that had been destroyed, every consciousness that had been absorbed, all of it began to flow back into existence. On Nexus Prime Station, Engineer Nam Soha watched through the sensors as something impossible happened. The creature's dark surface began to glow with warm golden light. The energy field around it shifted from the sickly green of consumption to something that looked like starlight. "What's happening out there?" Commander Lee asked over the radio. "I don't know," Soha replied, "but the creature has stopped moving toward Earth. It's just ... floating, and it's getting brighter." Across the solar system, the restoration continued. Jupiter's consumed moons began to reappear, but they were different now. They glowed with their own inner light, and sensors detected something extraordinary on there. Surfaces, cities, civilizations that had been destroyed millions of years ago were being brought back to life. On Earth, people who had fallen unconscious under the creature's psychic attack began to wake up. They opened their eyes with expressions of wonder and peace as if they had been given the most beautiful dreams imaginable. Inside the creature's consciousness, Hannah felt herself changing. Her individual identity was becoming part of something larger. But instead of being consumed, she was becoming more than she had ever been before. She could feel every restored world, every returned civilization, every consciousness that had been set free. The creature, she could no longer think of it as a monster, spoke to her. Through their shared awareness. "I remember now," it said. "I remember what it was like to explore for the joy of discovery, to meet new forms of life, and simply appreciate their uniqueness. To connect without consuming, you never lost that part of yourself," Hannah replied. "It was just buried under the hunger. But now, you can be what you were meant to be again." As the restoration process continued, both of their consciousness began to stabilize into something new. Hannah was still herself, but she was also part of the creature's vast awareness. She could see through its senses across multiple dimensions. She maintained her own thoughts and feelings. The creature, meanwhile, had become something closer to its original form. It was still enormous and powerful, but the hungry, desperate quality was gone. In its place was the curiosity and gentleness of a true explorer. "What happens now?" Hannah asked. "Now we continue the work," the creature replied. "There are other consumed civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Other worlds that were destroyed by creatures like what I became. We can restore them all. And Earth. Earth will be safe. More than safe. The knowledge and wisdom of 1,000,000 civilizations will be shared freely. Humanity will learn and grow beyond anything they ever imagined possible." Through their shared senses, Hannah watched as the creature, now transformed into something beautiful and luminous, began to move through space. But instead of consuming worlds, it visited them gently, sharing knowledge and helping civilizations that were struggling to survive on each world it touched. Amazing things happened. Diseases were cured by medical knowledge from ancient healers. Environmental problems were solved using technology from civilizations that had faced similar challenges. Wars ended as species learned about peace from cultures that had achieved harmony. Years passed. The being that had once been known as the Black Hawk became a legend across the galaxy. It was called the Lightbringer, the Restorer, the Friend of all worlds. And always, when children asked about its origins, they were told the story of Lieutenant Park Hannah, the woman who had been called a Wannabe, the soldier who couldn't march properly or shoot straight, the one who asked strange questions and read ancient books while others practiced combat drills, the one who had saved the galaxy not through strength or skill, but through understanding and compassion. On Nexus Prime Station, which had been converted into a center for intergalactic cooperation, Commander Lee often stood in the observation deck where Hannah had first seen the creature emerge from hyperspace. A memorial plaque hung on the wall, bearing her name and a simple inscription. She walked into darkness and brought back the light. Kimte, now an instructor for new recruits, made sure that every class learned Hannah's story. He told them about the importance of accepting differences, of valuing people who think in unusual ways, of never dismissing someone just because they don't fit the standard pattern. Cho Min, who had become a diplomat working with the restored civilizations, carried Hannah's ancient texts with her on every mission. The wisdom of the First Watchers had proved invaluable in understanding other cultures and building bridges between different species. But perhaps the most important part of the legend was this: Hannah was not gone. Sensitive individuals across the galaxy sometimes reported strange dreams. Dreams of a young woman who spoke with kindness and understanding. A presence that helped them when they felt lost or alone. A voice that reminded them that being different was not a weakness, but a gift. Scientists who studied consciousness theorized that Hannah's merger with the Lightbringer had created something unprecedented. A human awareness that existed across multiple dimensions, touching the lives of countless beings while remaining fundamentally, recognizably human. The Vorthok warriors who had once mocked her now told stories of their own about the little human who became light. In their culture, it was the highest honor possible to be remembered in such tales. On Earth, Children played games about the brave lieutenant who talked to monsters and turned them into friends. Parents read them bedtime stories about the power of understanding over violence, of compassion over conquest. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the stars seemed especially bright, people would look up at the sky and wonder if Hannah was still out there somewhere, still exploring, still learning, still helping others find their way home. In the deepest reaches of space, the Lightbringer continued its work. It moved from world to world, dimension to dimension, always accompanied by a consciousness that had once belonged to a young woman who never quite fit in with her military unit. Together, they had become something that the galaxy had never seen before and would never forget. Partnership between human compassion and cosmic power that proved that the universe's greatest problems could sometimes be solved not through war, but through the simple act of choosing to understand rather than destroy. The Wannabe had become eternal and across the galaxy. Whenever someone felt small or inadequate or different, they could look up at the stars and know that somewhere out there, someone who had felt exactly the same way had saved them all. Not through strength or skill or conventional heroism, but through the courage to be herself when the universe needed her most, Lieutenant Park Hannah had walked into legend. And legend had walked with her into forever.